Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories, where the quietest stories sometimes speak the loudest to our hearts. Have you ever made a choice not for yourself but for someone you love more than anything? Have you ever said yes to something you never wanted, just to hold on to something you couldn't bear to lose? Life doesn't always offer us clear paths. Sometimes we choose with trembling hands, tear-grilled eyes, or in the middle of a long, stormy night. And strangely enough, it's those unexpected turns that lead us somewhere we never thought we'd go. Because not all stories begin with love. Some begin with sacrifice, and somehow end with something beautifully real. Where are you right now as you listen to this story? Are you brewing your morning coffee, sitting in traffic, or maybe just looking for a quiet moment to catch your breath? Wherever you are, I hope you'll give this next chapter a few minutes of your heart, because sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. This one begins in a quiet corner of Seattle, where Sophie Bennett, a violin teacher, lived a life as gentle as the music she played. She didn't need much. A worn-down music room, her students, a steaming mug on rainy mornings, sheet music older than her favorite coat. Music, for her, wasn't a job. It was where she felt most herself. Until one stormy night, everything changed. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She paused, then answered. "Miss Bennett? This is St. Mercy Hospital. We're sorry. Your father's just been admitted. Massive heart attack. One call." And just like that, the world she knew collapsed. 20 minutes later, she was there. But it was already too late. The funeral took place 3 days later, beneath a silent, overcast sky. Sophie stood between her mother and younger brother Liam, her eyes dry. There were no more tears left. Everything passed like a faded frame. Hollow words from the minister, the soft thud of earth falling onto wood, quiet condolences from voices she barely registered. But one thing pulled her focus. At the far end of the cemetery, near a line of amber-colored trees, stood a man. Tall, still, a stranger in every sense of the word. Dressed in a long black coat, polished shoes, and an unreadable face. But his gaze, it was steady, focused, and it was on her. "Do you see him?" Liam whispered. "He's staring." Sophie gave a slight nod but said nothing. Before she could move toward him, the man turned, disappearing into the back seat of a sleek black car. The door shut quietly, and then he was gone, leaving behind a chill that didn't come from the wind. She didn't know his name, didn't know why he'd come, but deep down, something stirred. That visit wasn't accidental. A week after the funeral, while the scent of incense still lingered in the halls and sympathy cards lay unopened, 2 men in tailored suits arrived at the door. They carried sleek leather briefcases, polished business cards, and flawless manners, but their eyes held no warmth. "Sophie Bennett," the older one asked, voice even, impersonal. "We represent Ashton Vale Corporation. There are pressing matters regarding your late father." Mr. Daniel Bennett. At the family dining table, once a place of comfort, piles of documents now covered its surface. "Your father owed Mr. Lucas Ashton, CEO of Ashton Vale, a total of $6.8 million, the younger man explained, sliding a folder across the table. "The collateral no longer exists. Full repayment is now due." "That's impossible," her mother whispered, her hand trembling, not from illness but from shock. "My father would never," Sophie insisted, voice caught between disbelief and dread. "We have verified evidence of internal accounting fraud," the man said flatly, "all legally documented." The air grew thick, like trying to breathe through fog. Then, as if rehearsed, they produced a second folder, thicker, marked confidential. "If repayment isn't possible," the older man added, "Mr. Ashton offers an alternative arrangement." Sophie's fingers hovered over the first page. Her stomach dropped. A contract. But one clause caught her eye, and everything inside her went still. Marriage agreement. Sophie stared at the words, willing them to vanish if she just looked long enough. Marriage agreement. Mr. Ashton is willing to forgive the entire debt, one of the men explained, in exchange for your agreement to marry him for a term of 1 year. 1 full year, the other emphasized. No early termination. After that, you're free to leave. She wasn't sure what shook her more, the offer or the way they said it, like it was just another business transaction. In addition, they continued, Mr. Ashton will cover all of your mother's medical expenses and your brother's full tuition until graduation. Her mother broke down. No, you can't do this, Sophie. Sophie held her hand tightly, eyes still locked on the pages in front of her. There was no other option. The house was already mortgaged, Liam had just started college, and her mother, she needed treatment every week to survive. Sophie had always chosen the sensible path, the safe one, the right one. But now, safety no longer existed. Only one question remained. Could she survive 1 year for them? The next afternoon, she called the number on the documents. And that evening, she signed her name. That night, after signing her name, Sophie visited her father's grave one last time before leaving the city. I don't know what you got involved in, she whispered, tracing her fingers along the cold stone, but I'll find out. A sleek black limousine rolled up just as she turned away. The back window lowered slightly, just enough for her to see a pair of cool gray-blue eyes watching her. Lucas Ashton. No greeting, no emotion, just a gaze, steady, unreadable, and somehow unsettling. She stepped into the car, and in silence, her new life began. The Seraphine Lake Estate appeared after 2 hours of winding roads through dense pine forests. A modern architectural masterpiece perched on a cliff, staring down at the vast glassy water. Everything about it was perfectly designed, stunning, and utterly cold. Lucas didn't offer her a tour. There was no bridal suite, no soft welcome, only a short, clipped sentence. You'll stay in the East Wing, I'm in the West. We'll appear together when necessary. That was it. The first day passed in silence. In the days that followed, Sophie moved through the house like a ghost. She woke early, ate breakfast alone, wandered the frost-covered gardens, and returned to her room. Lucas was rarely seen. She only heard his footsteps echoing down the halls late at night, measured, solitary. One morning, while searching for the library, Sophie opened the wrong door. A grand piano stood in the center of a wide, time-worn music room. Dust clung to the shelves, but the keys were spotless. Beside the piano lay a faded piece of music, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat. In the soft morning light, filtering through half-drawn curtains, she noticed a photo frame on the windowsill. A young woman in her early 20s, dark hair, gentle eyes, and a smile that made you pause. Sophie sat at the bench, hesitated, then let her fingers fall gently onto the keys. Music flowed, soft, honest, unpracticed, but alive. She didn't know Lucas had entered until the final note faded into silence. You play beautifully, he said. His voice was lower this time, not cold, just quiet. Sophie turned, startled. I didn't mean to intrude. It's fine, he said, stepping into the room. That piano belonged to my mother. She used to teach at Juilliard. It's been silent for too long. A pause. Then Sophie asked, almost without thinking, Is that her? In the photo? Lucas's gaze drifted to the frame. A flicker of something passed through him. No, he replied. That's my sister, Emily. The name came out like a whisper, but it changed the air in the room. For the first time, something fractured in his expression. A grief that never left, a name still too heavy to carry out loud. And in that quiet moment, Sophie saw him, not the man from the contract or the one in the headlines, but someone wounded, human. Something had shifted between them, something that didn't belong to contracts or conditions, something unspoken but real. After that afternoon in the music room, something had shifted. Lucas remained reserved, but there was a new softness in his gaze when he looked at Sophie. Not quite warmth, but no longer ice. Sophie noticed the quiet things, the fleeting glances, the unspoken pauses when he mentioned his sister. This house, she realized, held more than silence. It held secrets, and Lucas carried many of them. One night, passing the West Wing, Sophie heard voices behind a slightly open door. "You're destroying yourself," a woman snapped. Vanessa, his ever-loyal assistant. "I don't need your opinion," Lucas replied, voice sharper than usual. "She's making you weak, can't you see it?" Silence, then Lucas, barely audible. "She's not what I expected." Sophie froze. That wasn't meant for her, but it reached her anyway. 2 days later, they flew to San Francisco for the Ashton Foundation's annual gala. The San Francisco Charity Gala shimmered like a crystal dream. Lucas and Sophie arrived arm in arm, perfectly poised for the cameras. Flashes burst, polite greetings filled the air. It was all part of the performance. But when Lucas rested his hand gently on her back, something within Sophie stirred. Soft, but real. When she was invited to open the night with a violin performance, Sophie hesitated. Then Lucas gave her a small nod, no pressure, just quiet encouragement. She stepped onto the stage. Under the warm lights and dozens of watchful eyes, Sophie closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes of Nocturne, the same piece she had discovered in the lake house, floated into the air like breath. Each note felt honest, unguarded. The room held its breath. When she finished, the applause was long and sincere. "And Lucas?" he smiled. Later, wandering past a hallway near the staff entrance, Sophie heard voices behind a half-closed door. "She's making him soft," a woman snapped. "Celeste." "Relax," replied a deep male voice. "Malcolm, Lucas's uncle. A few more days. The board will vote. He'll lose control of the company, and everything will go back to how it should be." "And the girl?" "Accidents happen, Celeste." Sophie froze. Every word sank like a stone in her chest. That night, after landing back in Seattle, rain lashed the roads. Lucas insisted on driving. He was uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes distant. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked softly. He didn't answer. Then it happened. The car skidded, a curve, screeching tires, metal twisted, darkness. When Sophie came to, blinking through broken glass and flashing hazard lights, she turned to find Lucas. Unmoving, bleeding, unconscious. And deep in her gut, a cold certainty settled. This wasn't just an accident. The ICU felt colder than Sophie expected. She sat beside Lucas, watching the slow, steady rhythm of the machines. Tubes, monitors, and bandages surrounded the man she had once known only as a stone-faced CEO. Now, he looked nothing like that. The doctors had said the next 24 hours were critical. If he didn't wake up soon, complications might follow. She gently held his hand. "You have to wake up, Lucas," she whispered. "Not just for you, for the truth we both need." That night, while reaching into his soaked coat to find his wallet, Sophie discovered something small tucked into the inner lining. A USB drive, carefully hidden. Curiosity, or perhaps instinct, urged her to plug it into her laptop. What she found made her breath catch. Dozens of encrypted folders, open to reveal internal financial reports, board meeting logs, email threads, everything pointing to Malcolm Ashton. As she arranged the files by date, her chest tightened. The transactions her father had been blamed for? Many took place after his access had been revoked. Some signatures were clearly forged. Lucas had been investigating quietly, alone, and he had carried the proof with him. The next morning, Lucas stirred. His brow furrowed as the sterile ceiling came into focus. He turned his head slightly, voice hoarse. "Sophie, what happened? Where am I?" "You're in the hospital," she said gently. "You were in a car accident." His eyes narrowed. "An accident? Or something else?" Sophie gave a quiet nod. "I think someone made sure it happened." She reached into her bag and handed him the USB drive. "You knew. You were protecting me. Now it's my turn." For a long moment, Lucas didn't speak. He just looked at her. No suspicion, no mask. only something that had never been part of their agreement. Trust Lucas was discharged a week later with cracked ribs, a head injury, and a silence deeper than any Sophie had seen in him before. But this time, it wasn't the silence of hiding. It was the silence before a storm. Together with his legal team and Sophie, Lucas called an emergency meeting with Ashton Vale's board of directors. That morning, inside Ashton Vale's grand boardroom, all eyes turned to Lucas as he entered. Still limping from the accident, but his gaze burned with a determination no one had seen in years. Beside him, Sophie held tightly onto a USB drive. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to end it. Malcolm Ashton, Lucas's uncle and once the trusted lieutenant of the Harrington family, kept his composure. "You should still be resting, Lucas," he said, voice smooth as ever. "There's still time to recover." "It's because I've recovered that I'm here," Lucas replied, his voice calm yet sharp, scanning the faces of board members and shareholders. "I want everyone to see and hear the truth that's been buried for 7 years." Sophie stepped forward and connected the USB to the projector. On the screen appeared a series of financial transactions under her father's name, Jonathan Bennett, dated after he had been suspended and had all his access revoked. "These were forged," she said clearly. "Every signature, every command. My father was framed for an embezzlement scheme he didn't commit." Malcolm smirked. "System errors happen. These documents don't prove who is behind them." Lucas pressed play on a voice recording. Malcolm's voice filled the room. "If Jonathan doesn't confess, I'll make sure his family loses everything." A few people gasped, but Lucas wasn't finished. "And it wasn't just Sophie's father. He also caused my parents' death 7 years ago in what was supposed to be an accident." Malcolm slammed his hand on the table. "Ridiculous. That crash was unexpected." "No," Lucas cut in. "Police confirmed the brakes were tampered with. And this email," he pointed to the screen, "shows you contacting the insurance advisor the day before the crash, asking to activate emergency succession." The room went still. Malcolm looked around, but no eyes met his. Sophie stepped forward. "My father died in despair, thinking he had done the right thing by confessing under pressure. And your father, your mother, your sister, they didn't have to die, but they were sacrificed. For greed." Lucas stared at his uncle, voice low, aching. "You traded your soul for this company, but today, you're losing it forever." At that moment, police entered the boardroom. No one moved to stop them. As the cuffs clicked around Malcolm's wrists, his smile was gone. When the room cleared, Lucas and Sophie remained. He sank into a chair, hands trembling. "It's over," he whispered. Sophie stepped beside him, rested a hand on his shoulder. "No," she said softly. "It's just beginning. And this time, nothing's holding us back." Time moved slower after everything fell apart, and then, finally, came back together. Lucas and Sophie didn't rush. They didn't try to fix the past. Instead, they let quietness heal them. Mornings began with Lucas making coffee. Nights ended with Sophie playing piano while he read nearby, occasionally looking up, his gaze soft in a way she once thought he wasn't capable of. Once, she fell asleep by the piano after a long day. Lucas covered her gently with a blanket. Standing there, he brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, more to himself than her, "I don't know when it happened, but I'm sure now, I never want to lose you." Love didn't come in storms. It arrived like that, in the smallest things. Then one golden afternoon by the lake, Lucas brought Sophie to an old wooden bridge his sister used to love. No roses, no candles, just breeze, aged timber, and a heart ready to speak. He turned to her, pulling a small ring from his pocket. "We started for the wrong reasons. But today I ask you, not because of our past, not to make things right, but because I want to walk the rest of this life with you." Sophie looked at him, eyes soft. After a quiet moment, she nodded. "Yes, because for the first time, I know I'm choosing right." 2 weeks later, they married in a quiet garden at Lake Haven. No press, no spectacle, just a few close friends and two people who had chosen each other with open hearts. This time there was no contract, no performance, just a promise written not on paper, but on the walls of their hearts. In trust, in peace, in love,